Awakening and the dumbest bill in America, and even a go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Podcast listeners, I am back, tan, rested, and ready from the great state of Florida. And this podcast is called Awakening. And we do have, as I said, a really dumbest dumb bill in America and a go woke or go broke. We're calling this podcast, by the way, Awakening, because American citizens are finally awakening to what is happening to their daily lives, which is what matters most to them, right? Most voters, most Americans, when they get up in the morning and they see the everyday things that they take for granted being affected by government in a negative way, they start to pay attention. They awake. That's exactly what's happening now. Voters prefer Republican candidates over Democrats by 8% in the Daily Caller. Again, voters, according to a poll, prefer Republican congressional candidates over Democrats by 8%. By the way, I would say that will even be true down ballot in most counties across America. Even if you live in a blue county, you might want to have to worry about your seat if you are a progressive Democrat. You might have to worry about the fact that a Republican could take you out. Or if a Republican will never get elected there, like, certain like the mayor of New York City, for example. Obviously, there's going to be a Democrat that won, and there is a Democrat that won. But if you really wanted to vote for a Republican, I think what you're going to see is at some point, you're going to probably see that you're going to have Republicans gaining on Democrats, even in those blue areas. Okay, fine. Maybe they won't win. In the extreme blue places in the cities of California and the cities of New York, like New York City. However, they are going to make gains, and that means that down ballot in counties that are marginally blue counties, you're going to see a lot of Republicans elected. And that's why this awakening matters, because that's exactly what happened in the state of Virginia. So first, voters prefer Republican congressional candidates to Democratic ones by 8 percentage points, a poll released last Sunday found, just a couple days ago. 46% of registered voters prefer a generic Republican in their local congressional race, compared to 38% who prefer a generic Democrat, according to the poll conducted by USA Today and Suffolk University from November 3rd to November 5th, which is a very recent poll. Pollsters surveyed 1,000 registered voters for a margin of error of 3.1%. Americans gave low marks for Congress as a whole, with the institution holding a meager 12% approval rating. Podcast listeners, 12% approval rating of the United States Congress, compared to 75% disapproval. Congressional Republicans received a 35% approval rating, and congressional Democrats were at 29%. USA Today and Suffolk University concluded the poll before the House of Representatives passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act late Friday night. So the poll was taken before that act was passed. Does that mean that because the act passed that there would be more support for Democrats or less? I actually don't know what the answer to that question is. Clearly, the Democrats think that by passing it, they're going to be able to gain votes because they're going to use the $1 trillion plus of new spending to buy off constituencies. Because podcast listeners, that is the Democrat playbook. It is to spend as much money as humanly possible, and most especially money that you do not have, that future generations will be paying off, and to use all of that spending to buy voters. And how do you buy voters? By expanding entitlements. And when you can't really expand the existing entitlements anymore. You create new and greater entitlements. Why not? Because it's working for the Democrat Party. 61% of individuals polled supported the infrastructure bill, including 1/3 of Republicans. Democrats like Virginia Senator Mark Warner cited the bill's passage as crucial for the party's chances in the 2022 midterms. Warner blamed Democrat gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe's loss in his home state on the Democrats' intra-party negotiations over the package, which lasted more than 4 months. So Senator Mark Warner from the state of Virginia actually believes that Terry McAuliffe lost the gubernatorial race because Washington didn't spend more money fast enough. I mean, talk about being tone deaf to the voters of the state of Virginia. The people of the state of Virginia, I don't think infrastructure spending was on their minds at all. It's pretty obvious that what was on their minds was critical race theory and the fact that a gubernatorial candidate actually had the guts to say and the stupidity to say what the teachers' unions believe, and basically parroting the teachers' unions by saying parents should not have a role in the curricula that is taught and should not have a role at all in the education of their children. And that really misses the whole point, the foundational point of our country, which is they are our children. The children belong to the parents, and the parents actually do get to decide. And that is what crushed Terry McAuliffe, because you already had all these issues in the state of Virginia that were going on with critical race theory and rapes going on actually in Loudoun County public schools and other public schools in the state of Virginia. And you had this wokeness of transgender dressing of children in K to 12. And the Democrats thought that was okay. In fact, they wanted to promote it. And Terry McAuliffe is like, you don't have a right to tell us what you can do in our public schools. Parents, that's not your right. The right is of the teachers union and the school boards. They get to decide, not you. But Senator Mark Warner from the state of Virginia actually believes that it was infrastructure that caused Terry McAuliffe to lose. So the poll also found that only 38% of Americans approve of President Joe Biden's performance in office, while 59% disapprove. Folks, in an actual presidential election, if you have a president that wins 59% to his opponent 38%, that's what we call a landslide. And that's an important thing and takeaway from this poll, that right now, at this moment in time, if Joe Biden were to run for re-election, he would lose by a landslide. And when a president loses by a landslide, we know what else happens? Down ballot, the president's party loses by a landslide down ballot as well. You have legislatures that flip, not just at the national level, but across the country. And it's about time. It's about time that this happened. It's about time that there is this awakening in America where people actually see what the Democrats really want to do to you and to your country. And that awakening, as I said earlier, only generally speaking occurs when you actually drive up to the gas pump and you say, what the heck is going on? That only occurs when you go to the grocery store and you say, why are prices not only getting higher by the week, but where is all of the stock? Where's all the stuff? There's less stuff in the grocery store. There are empty shelves. And you also find out that you can't buy a car, and that the car dealers, the new car dealers, are increasing the prices of cars much higher than is necessary because there isn't a supply of the chips to make the cars. And then every single aspect of the American economy is tied to energy. Anything and everything requires energy to produce. And if gasoline and natural gas and energy in general is more expensive, you know what happens? Every single line item in your home budget goes up. And now they're talking about if your home is heated by natural gas or oil, that you could see as much as a 40 to 60% increase this winter in your home heating bills because of the fact that your home is heated by natural gas or by oil. These are the things that directly affect the American people. And when the American people are directly affected, you know what happens? They start awakening. And that's exactly what happened in the state of Virginia. That's exactly what happened in the state of New Jersey, which I will tell you right now, I do not believe for one moment that Murphy won re-election. I mean, look, if there's any place where ballot stuffing is an art form, it's in the state of New Jersey. I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's one of the first things you think of in New Jersey. At least I do. And Murphy, of course, he's behind. And where have we seen this before, podcast listeners? The governor of New Jersey, the sitting governor, is behind. He's behind the entire night. He continues to be behind. And then lo and behold, the next day, a blue county or two holds back their votes to find out how many they need. And then they report. And then that is when the election is actually lost. Why don't we have this conversation, podcast listeners? Why does the national news media have this conversation? The conversation, namely, that there should be a requirement that at the night of the election, no later than 11 p.m., every local government and every precinct must report its votes. Why is it that all across America, when there are really close elections, it's only the blue counties that have a great deal of difficulty getting their precincts together and reporting them in a timely manner? Why is that, I wonder? And we just saw it again in the state of New Jersey. How is that? Why don't we have that conversation? The Democrats are like, oh no, there was never any cheating that occurred, ever. Cheating just doesn't occur, period. It doesn't occur. So let's, for a moment, podcast listeners, stipulate that. Okay, let's just say, okay, fine. Cheating never occurs. Then let's meet halfway. How about every single county and every single local government has to provide its count by 11 p.m. The day of the election. The day of the election. They have to do that. Oh, no, they can't do that. That's not Of course they can do that. This is the 21st century. I mean, someone just pointed out to me the other day, it's like, well, how is it that, Dancing with the Stars and American Idol can have your ability to vote and they know what the vote is like that during the show, but the blue counties can't even figure out how to do that. They can't figure out. It's like, oh, no, it's too technical for us. We can't figure that out. And I have to tell you, it's a really good question. So let's, podcast listeners, stipulate that the blue counties have to report by 11 p.m. Remember, the state of Florida, how complex the state of Florida is, how massive the state of Florida is, with 3 million more voters now than the state of New York. And in Florida, you get the election results of the entire state that evening. Why is it that red states can figure this out and blue counties can't? Why is it? Well, because, ladies and gentlemen, there's an incentive to hold back your votes. There's a complete incentive to hold back your votes. More bad information, more bad decisions, or more bad results for Democrats. The new Texas poll just got America's attention. Governor Abbott is already ahead of Beto O'Rourke with 9 points. So Democrats have spent time and considerable amounts of money targeting the Lone Star State. Often we've heard they were going to flip the conservative state blue, but sadly for them, we haven't seen it happen. In fact, recent elections show previously blue districts with large Hispanic populations are flipping for Republicans. The state, from all appearances, is getting more conservative as Democrats crash and burn all over the country. And in a recent poll of possible governor candidates, the left got some more bad news. 46% of registered voters in Texas support Republican Governor Greg Abbott's reelection bid, compared to 37% who back expected Democrat challenger Beto O'Rourke, according to a new poll from the University of Texas at Austin and the Texas Tribune. A new poll gauged Governor Abbott's chances at re-election if he ran against possible Democrat challenger Francis Beto O'Rourke. According to this poll, Abbott won by 46-37, a huge margin, an embarrassment to the liberal establishment. By the way, the liberal establishment that's been trying to flip Texas for like the past 25 years. Francis O'Rourke, an Irishman who goes by Beto to trick Latino voters, which is true, by the way. Francis O'Rourke, I mean, he's as Irish can be, and changed his first name, or at least uses the first name Beto, because it sounds Latino, has been propped up by the Democrats again and again in failed races. He tried to take Republican Senator Ted Cruz's seat, who is an actual Hispanic man, and lost pathetically. Even after that, O'Rourke thought he could run for president, and he failed, backing out to help Biden. But O'Rourke is apparently so unimpressive, he never even got that sweet gig Biden allegedly offered him. Now, it seems like the Democrats want him to run for governor of Texas. Can't imagine why Democrats would want to nominate Beto O'Rourke for this race. It wouldn't pick him to mow my lawn, let alone run a state. And of course, this article is in the Patriot Journal, but it doesn't, and obviously the article is skewed, let's face it. It's a conservative paper, but the paper does reference this poll, which is taken by the University of Texas at Austin. And also the Texas Tribune. And that's very relevant in a state like Texas because, look, podcast listeners, the Democrats have been trying for a couple of generations to do what? To flip the state of Texas blue and to flip the state of Florida blue. And their angle was, we're going to use an enormous amount of illegals from Hispanic countries and populate those two states so that those illegals would eventually be able to vote, or that their children, when they grow old enough, would be able to vote. And therefore, you could do what? Flip the states blue. Except that in the state of Texas, we now have Hispanics that are saying what? Well, we moved here from Mexico and from Central America and from South America because we wanted to get rid of the governments that ran those economies into the ground. And we see Biden doing that same thing to America. Why would we reward that? We left that. And so now they're flipping Republican in large numbers in the state of Texas. And so meanwhile, at the border, of course, Biden is letting all of these illegals into the country and doing everything he can to put them all over the country, by the way, including Florida and Texas, naturally, and every other red state and small towns and so forth, for the sole purpose of eventually flipping every state in America. But the Democrats forget you actually have to stand for something. You actually have to believe in something. Your policies actually have to work. You have to be able to articulate why your policies are good for the American people. And so how do you articulate that when gasoline is $4 and $5 and $6 and $7 a gallon across the country, which, by the way, is true in many parts of the country? Meantime, Florida Republicans officially outnumber Democrats in voter registration for the first time. This is in the Western Journal, podcast listeners. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis announced on Friday that registered Republican voters in Florida have now surpassed Democrat voters for the first time in the state's history. DeSantis shared the news during the National Conference of State Legislatures as a milestone achievement that the state's GOP has been pursuing for years. Quote, "Today, for the first time in the history of Florida, we've now overtaken Democrats," DeSantis said, according to the Tampa Bay Times. Florida voter registration numbers from August showed Republicans were within 24,000 voters of surpassing the state's registered Democrats. The new announcement, based on more recent counts at the state and local levels, shows GOP registrations have now taken the lead. The shift is significant as former President Barack Obama won the state in 2008 and 2012. Podcast listeners, that's huge. Florida put Barack Obama into the White House. Okay, he won it both times. Do you think for one moment that Barack Obama would win the state of Florida today? Never. Former President Donald Trump won Florida in 2016 and 2020 in close finishes. In addition, as one of the nation's most populous states, Florida now carries 30 electoral votes in presidential elections. That's enormous. At the state level, the effects were noticeable as Republicans made strong gains during the 2020 elections. In addition to a Trump win, Florida flipped 2 congressional districts from blue to red. Huge. Just 10 of the state's 27 congressional districts remain under Democrat control. And by the way, those 10 out of the 27 congressional districts in the state of Florida that are still in Democrat control, remember, Florida is now going to redistrict. And as the state becomes more and more red, if I were a Democrat congressman or congresswoman, I would be really, really worried. Both of Florida's senators are also Republicans. They include longtime Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Rick Scott. DeSantis drew nationwide attention earlier this week when he called the Biden administration the Brandon administration in a nod to the viral "Let's go Brandon" phrase. That's awesome, podcast listeners. Listen again. DeSantis drew nationwide attention earlier this week when he called the Biden administration the Brandon administration. Let's do that from now on, okay? Let's just from now on just say the Brandon administration says today that DeSantis made the comment during an election integrity news conference at Palm Beach Wednesday morning. We don't have that clip, but we'll certainly play that tomorrow. If you look at all the things that are going on, you see big tech, you see the corporate media. Although they weren't too happy with Virginia last night, DeSantis said, quote, if you look at what's going on with some of the big corporations with their woke agenda, the crowd roared at the next comments from the governor. And then the governor said this, quote, when you look at the Brandon administration in terms of what they're doing, he said, it just goes just awesome. And that was what the governor was saying at the National Council of State Legislatures, which was being held in Orlando. Actually, it was Tampa, Florida. My bad. It was in Tampa, Florida, which I was in Florida, but I wasn't there, just so you know. And as a result of Florida flipping Republican, I must say this to you. It's even more Republican than I think what the numbers show, because many of the Democrats in Florida haven't switched parties because they're lifelong Democrats and they're like, I'm too old to switch, but they've been voting Republican for a long time. So the Democrats have a problem on their side. It's not just that there are more R's registered than D's. It's that many of the D's in their own party are de facto R's. And that's not the case on the opposite side with the Republican Party in Florida. And I can tell you this, one little snippet. I was talking to someone in Florida because that's where I was for the past 10 days. And when I was talking to this individual who is a Florida resident and works there, the individual said to me, because, you know, we really talk to people openly that move here. And we just say to them, we say, hey, where do you move from? Where did you move from? He said, and recently he talked to a guy and said he was moving from California to Florida, which I think is somewhat unusual, right? Because usually Californians move to nearby states out west. They don't move to Florida. Usually it's people from the East Coast, you know, the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic that move to Florida. And he says to the guy, so you moved from California? And the guy's like, yeah. And so this gentleman I was talking to said, he literally looked at the guy in the eye and said, please don't bring your politics with you. I mean, can you imagine? That's how proud the people are of Florida with the way their state is being governed and how livable and wonderful their state is. And when I was on the airplane back from Florida to Maryland, which, by the way, was fortunately not too cold when I got back, but when I was on the airplane, I was listening to Victor Davis Hanson, One of his podcasts is a great, intellect and certainly an intellectual. And in his podcast, Victor Davis Hanson brought up a really, really good point. He says, it's really interesting. You see all of the progressives and you see how they vote, and they vote for all these crazy policies and all these woke policies. And they're right at the front lines of the culture wars. Every time there's a tax, they're all about it. Let's vote for that tax. It's great. He says, you ever notice that when people in blue states who vote that way, the progressives, you ever notice when they relocate, when they decide to retire, when they decide to move, you ever notice where they move? They don't move to other blue states. People from New York, they don't move to Illinois. They don't move to California. No, they move to the Carolinas. They move to Florida. They move to Arizona. Blue state progressives don't move out of state to other blue states. And that tells you all you want to know. And I was like, daggone it. Victor Davis Hanson, he's so brilliant the way he just brings it down to an understandable level. And that's absolutely true. Look, I have a cousin who left the state of Maryland. She voted for all the taxes. She voted for all the left-wing policies. And she's very vocal on social media about all of those issues, very virtuous. And of course, she left the state of Maryland and moved to a no-tax state. It's like, well, first of all, why did you leave the state? And secondly, why did you move to a state that has no taxes? As in no taxes, I mean like no income taxes. And we know why. We know why, because they don't want to actually live under the consequences of their policies, because they already know their policies don't work. And those who can leave do. And those who can are stuck with those really awful policies and just don't seem to understand that what they're voting for is the ruination of their state. And so in a CNN poll, a majority of voters disapprove of Biden's handling of the presidency. A majority of voters said President Joe Biden is not paying enough attention to the biggest issues plaguing the nation, and that they disapprove of Biden's handling of his presidency, according to a newly released CNN poll conducted by SSRS. So I'm reading this kind of duplicate article because even CNN is seeing a problem. And when CNN sees a problem, especially when they're always playing cover for the progressives, it's probably pretty bad. Among those polled between November 1 and November 4th, 58% said Biden has not paid enough attention to the most important crises, a 15% increase from an April poll. Wow. 36% of those polled said the economy is the biggest crisis facing the nation. Among individuals who believe that, 72% of them said Biden has not given the issue enough attention, according to CNN. Yeah, CNN. The second biggest issue is coronavirus. Specifically, for 20% of those polled within that group, 79%, Biden does have the right priorities, of course. Because naturally they're all in on these vaccine mandates and vaccine exclusions and the new segregation with vaccine passports. And so you have to understand, podcast listeners, that we have a true awakening in the entire United States. The awakening has been going on for a while, ever since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected. And that awakening was brought to the forefront with the election in the state of Virginia, where the House of Delegates flipped from Democrat to Republican, and the governor flipped from Democrat to Republican, and the lieutenant governor flipped from Democrat to Republican, and of course, the AG in Virginia flipped from Democrat to Republican. And that kind of thing does not happen because the citizens in your state were unhappy that more spending from infrastructure didn't happen. Oh, no. No, it happened because everyday issues that affect you, as I said before, gasoline, housing prices, prices of food, lack of supply, no cars to purchase unless you have a lot of money to purchase them. All of those things, the everyday things, are affecting your life, and you realize the people in charge aren't representing your best interests. So next up, podcast listeners, Senator John Kennedy versus Gabriel P. Sanchez. So here's the deal. Senator John Kennedy is from Louisiana. He is, without question, one of my favorite senators in the United States Senate because Senator John Kennedy, a Republican, obviously he shares the name of another famous individual in United States history, namely President John Kennedy. But Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana is hysterically funny because he's not only incredibly bright, but he's funny because the way he asks questions are just in a very commonsensical way. He asks them in a much more understandable way to be able to really get to the key issue when you have a nominee who is going to be serving as a judge, and not just serving for a term, but serving for life. And so in this particular case, Gabriel P. Sanchez has been nominated for Circuit Judge of the Ninth Circuit. So Gabriel P. Sanchez, nominated for the circuit, the Ninth Circuit, by, of course, President Biden. And Senator John Kennedy has him in front of the committee, along with other Democrats and Republicans on the Judiciary Committee. And Senator John Kennedy asked just some really basic questions. I think there were 3 or 4 basic questions that he asked. I've pulled out just the one that I think is the most obvious. And you hear Gabriel P. Sanchez, who could very well serve life as a judge on the Ninth Circuit. You hear his answer and you just say to yourself, what has happened to the Democrat Party? And what has happened to common sense in America? And John Kennedy just breaks it down to just that, which is common sense. So here's John Kennedy asking the question, and you'll hear Gabriel P. Sanchez with the answer. We have 2 clips on this. Here's the first clip. Here it is.
Let me ask you your thoughts on another subject. Biologically, how many sexes are there?
As I understand it, there are different views on that topic.
I'm asking you your view.
Again, that is an area that I believe could come before me as an issue, as it has come recently.
I'm not asking about a case. I'm asking about you. Biologically, in your opinion, as a thinking adult, how many sexes are there?
Senator, as I said before, my own personal views, I don't want them to enter into my role as a judge. And so if I were to be faced with an issue where a person's sex or gender came before me, I would apply that Supreme Court precedent and consider it in the context of
that.
So there's Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, asking very commonsensical and dummied down questions to Gabriel P. Sanchez, the nominee for the Ninth Circuit. And John Kennedy asks the simple question, how many sexes are there? And Gabriel Sanchez's first response was, well, there are different views on that subject. There are different views on the subject of how many sexes are there. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that we are in the 21st century and the Democrat Party actually not only believes there are more than 2 sexes, but actually believes that they need to put judges on the Ninth Circuit and throughout courts and circuits in America for the sole purpose of being able to say there are different views on this subject. Well, we have the second part of this exchange concerning how many sexes are there between John Kennedy and Gabriel P. Sanchez. We have that clip, and here it is.
I'm asking you personally, biologically, how many sexes are there in your opinion?
I would give the same answer as before, where I would not want to give an answer of my personal view and give the impression that I'm prejudging an issue myself.
Okay. Have you thought about it?
I have.
Okay. What was your conclusion?
that it is a matter of importance and debate in our society today. And while I have my own personal views about it, my role as a judge is to apply the law and precedent and let the arguments and facts speak for themselves.
So, John Kennedy asking, I understand that you don't want to say how you're going to rule as a judge about how many sexes there are, so I'll stipulate that. So Kennedy says, I just want to know who you are, what you believe. So tell me, what does Gabriel P. Sanchez believe about this? And so he can't answer the question. He can't answer the question as to how many sexes there are. So his answer instead is, Gabriel Sanchez's answer is, well, I may have a case in the future that deals with this matter, so I really can't talk about it. Can't talk about how many sexes there are. So what is he saying? I might have a case involving Dr. Rachel Levine. I might have a case concerning Dr. Rachel Levine, and we might have to determine whether there is a third sex, or whether there can be multiple sexes at one time, or maybe there's a fourth sex. And we see the results of this podcast, listeners, of this craziness in places like Loudoun County, Virginia, where a male student was allowed, a child was allowed to dress in a skirt. And that child was permitted, a male child dressing in that skirt or dress, was allowed to go into a girl's bathroom. And then that child indeed assaulted and raped a girl in the girl's bathroom. This is the result of Gabriel P. Sanchez and the Democrats' ridiculous concept and idea that there are more than two sexes. And they're using K-12 to experiment, which, of course, as you and I both know, not only should be illegal, but they should go to jail for it, for putting children in that kind of danger. It's just ridiculous. But I had to play those two clips for you because John Kennedy just is able to really bring out the common sense question. Like, I don't really care what you're going to do in the court. That's right. That's fine. I just want to know what you believe. Well, I can't answer that question of how many sexes there are. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. You won't believe this. One of the world's largest investment firms will need permission to hire white men. So leaders at one of the largest investment firms in the world, State Street Global Advisors, will need to ask permission to hire white men as it rolls out a diversity hiring initiative. Quote, this is now front and central for State Street. It's on every senior executive scorecard, said Jess McNicholas, the bank's head of inclusion, diversity, and corporate citizenship in London, according to the Sunday Times. Quote, all of our leaders have to demonstrate at their annual appraisals what they have done to improve female representation and the number of colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds. The company aims to triple the number of Black, Asian, and other minority staff in senior positions by 2023, the Sunday Times reported. And so if executives don't meet the target, they will face lowered bonuses. Recruiters will now have to establish panels of 4 or 5 employees, including a woman and a person with a minority background, when hiring middle management staff. The firm will still hire white men, McNicholas said, but recruiters are required to show that women and minority applicants were interviewed by the panels. The company is pledging to hold ourselves accountable for strengthening Black and Latinx Latinx-owned businesses. So there you have it. You have this Go Woke or Go Broke. The idea that you are going to judge people by the way they look and not judge them as how effective they will be as money managers. So then, podcast listeners, why would you hire a firm that hires people not on competence and on merit, but instead solely on the way they look? I know we've had this conversation before, obviously, but here's the thing. This is happening across corporate America. Do you want your pilot to be not fully competent and they were hired simply by the way they look? Do you want your investment manager to be hired by the way they look, even though they're not competent or the best person for the job? How about your doctor? How about your surgeon? How about your bus driver? It doesn't really matter. It's not just white collar jobs. It's all jobs. They go, I'm sorry, I know your house is completely crooked the way I built it, but I was hired during the diversity period. And the thing is it's just the way it goes. So I don't understand why any company would do this, but this is what's happening in corporate America. And that is go woke or go broke. And next up, podcast listeners, we have the daily Biden dumpster fire. Yes, the daily Biden dumpster fire. So first up, the White House walks back Biden's comments on migrant family payments. So this daily Biden dumpster fire is about how Biden wants to pay off people at the border, which we know will cause more people to come when you pay illegals to come to the United States and you reward them for breaking the law. Kind of obvious. So in the Hill newspaper, the White House on Thursday walked back President Biden's comments from the day before that the administration would not be paying migrants separated at the border during the last administration's $450,000 each. So to restate this, Biden could pay as much as $450,000 to migrants who were separated at the border, separated from their children by the Trump administration. Quote, if it saves taxpayer dollars and puts the disastrous history of the previous administration's use of zero tolerance and family separation behind us, the president is perfectly comfortable with the Department of Justice settling with the individuals and families who are currently in litigation with the United States government. White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters. Biden on Wednesday was asked about the reports that his administration was contemplating a payment of roughly $450,000 per person for separated migrants, parents, and children. That's not going to happen, Biden told reporters. Jean-Pierre, Biden's spokesman, on Thursday, asserted Biden was reacting specifically to the $450,000 figure that was mentioned when he asked about it. Quote, as press accounts to date indicate, DOJ made clear to the plaintiffs that the reported figures are higher than anywhere that a settlement can land, she said. In other words, they're going to pay something. $450,000 may be too high, but they're going to pay these people who broke our laws some kind of money. And so the White House is still backing off of this story because it's a disastrous story. And let's face it, if you're the White House, you are totally going to want to get this off of your desk long before the next election, which of course would be November of 2022, which is a year away. You surely don't want to be able to continue talking about this. What you want to do is you want to quietly pay these people off. Because if you quietly pay these people off, then maybe that will stop the flipping of many Hispanic communities from Democrat to Republican. And if you're a Democrat and you pay off people who are here illegally, I'm sure they're going to vote for you. And so Biden then comes in front of the press corps and he decides to wave his finger at them and virtue signal as to why paying them is such a good idea. So he's flipped twice, right? Initially said no. Then his Jean-Pierre press secretary said yes. And now Biden is saying, it might be something, and how dare you even question me? Well, we had that clip, podcast listeners, and here it is.
That this report about migrant families at the border getting payments was garbage.
No, I didn't say that. Let's get it straight. You said everybody coming across the border gets $450,000.
So the number was what you had a
The
problem
number I was referring to.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing.
Sure.
If, in fact, because of the outrageous behavior of the last administration, you coming across the border, whether it was legal or illegal, and you lost your child, it's gone, you deserve some kind of compensation, no matter what the circumstance. What that will be, I have no idea.
But you're okay with DOJ negotiating a settlement?
So there you go. Clearly, Biden was coached by his staff before he went out there to act like he was and pretend as if he was really passionate about this issue. If you lost your child, as he's pointing to the reporter, and if you lost your child, you deserved, by the way, they didn't lose their child. Their children didn't die. Okay. They were separated at the border by ICE because there was concern that they were being trafficked. And that's why that happened. But if you're a Democrat, you're going to use any excuse and you're going to lie and you're going to do whatever it takes to be able to pay them off so they will vote for you. And that's really what this is about, podcast listeners. This is totally about buying off people, buying them off and encouraging millions more to come to the border. Oh my God, I hope I get separated at the border because I might get $450,000 by coming into the United States illegally. Oh, what a great idea. And I'm going to vote for the Democrats. And I'll even cheat. I'll even make sure that I ballot harvest and that I go and I fill out ballots that aren't even mine. And I make sure that I vote by mail so they won't really know. Of course, you're not supposed to be voting at all because you're illegally here. But that's exactly what this is about. This is about completely deconstructing America and doing so by eliminating borders altogether and paying people off. So Ted Cruz, what did Ted Cruz say about this? So Ted Cruz tweets out concerning Joe Biden paying people off. He goes, so Joe Biden wants to give $450,000 to every illegal immigrant, and Hunter Biden paintings sell for $500,000 each. Perfect solution. Give a Hunter Biden painting to every illegal immigrant. A win-win. So you just give a Hunter Biden painting to every illegal immigrant instead of just giving them $450,000 of US dollars, and the problem would be solved. I actually like that idea. That's a great idea. And then we'll see how much money they can get when they try to sell a Hunter Biden painting. Maybe $5 if they're lucky, versus Hunter selling his painting directly, in which case he gets $500,000. And I mean, only Ted Cruz can say these things and get away with them. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up? Mr. Producer, here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is Black Trees Matter. Yes, you heard that correctly. Black trees matter. And why do they matter? Well, Kamala Harris, okay? Kamala Harris, your vice president, who doesn't go to the border ever to see what's really happening, even though she's in charge of the border, decided instead to go to NASA. And when she went to NASA, she was given a presentation by NASA. And we're first going to set this up by telling you what NASA is saying. So this is from the actual NASA website. It says, Vice President Harris visits NASA to see vital climate science work. The urgency of earth science and climate studies look at the spotlight Friday as Vice President Kamala Harris visited NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. The vice president received a first-hand look at how the nation's space program studies climate change and provides crucial information to understand our planet's changes and their impacts on our lives. Okay, I'm all for that first paragraph, right? You have satellites in outer space. They're looking at Earth. And what they're really seeing is not our impact here in the United States, which is helpful, of course, but we know that there are other countries that don't respect the environment at all. And it's helpful to know this so that we can encourage those countries to not plunder their environment. But that isn't exactly what Kamala Harris wanted to do. Instead, Vice President Kamala Harris asked NASA if it could use its satellites to track trees by race in various neighborhoods as part of environmental justice during a recent display on climate change, leading to many to ridicule the vice president online and even giving rise to a Black Trees Matter hashtag. Podcast listeners, we have the clip. You won't believe it. Here it is.
Climate adaptation strategies.
Can you measure trees? Part of that data that you're referring to, and it's in EJ, it's environmental justice, but you can also track by race. There are averages in terms of the number of trees in the neighborhood where people live.
So, you're at NASA. You have satellites looking at every country in the world, and close up, far away, these satellites are the most powerful satellites in the world. And why wouldn't you ask the question, hey, how much deforestation has occurred, let's say, in the past 20 years in the Amazon rainforest? That would be really good to know. I would like to know that because no one wants to see deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. How long does it take to replant those areas and have them grow back? How much do we have more trees today in the United States in the last 20 years or less? So, for example, 25 years ago, were there more trees in the U.S. or less? And that'd be a fair question to ask. How long would it take us to replant those trees? And where would be the best place to plant those trees? Oh, no. If you're a Democrat, you don't ask the common sense questions, the questions that could be useful for American citizens to know when you have an opportunity to watch these programs with NASA and watch the presentations. No, you ask the questions to try to create a racial division in America over trees. Black trees matter. It matters, right? It matters not just that there are trees, but it matters where they are. I mean, look, I plant trees all the time. I admit it. I actually am one of those people. I like to plant fruit trees in my yard. I like to plant different kinds of trees. I think it's really cool to watch them grow. And I think it's neat to have different kinds of trees and create your own food on your property if you can. And maybe that would be a great conversation for the vice president to have. Hey, how about if you guys did this too in America? What if you tried that too? Instead of just planting an oak tree, maybe plant a cherry tree, something that actually produces fruit. But no, she has to say, the only thing that matters is where the trees are, because if the trees aren't in areas where there are people of color, then somehow that is racist. It's ridiculous and it's disgusting that this is what has happened to the United States of America. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. would be just disgusted with this vice president. I guarantee you he would. And I would dare any elected official who's black who to come after me, just come after me once and say that Martin Luther King wouldn't be disgusted with a statement like that. Because what he would say is what I would say too, and probably what you would say. Here's an answer. Plant a tree. When I was in middle school and elementary school in Baltimore County, Maryland, you know what we had? We had National Arbor Day, I believe that's what it was called. And they gave us a tree to take home for free and to plant that tree. And we always planted the tree. I'll bet that doesn't happen anymore in schools. Guess what? If it did, problem solved, right? Problem solved. No matter where you live, I can guarantee you can find some space somewhere to plant that tree. But nonetheless, she has to turn it into a racial matter. I'm going to play this clip one more time because you have to hear it. So let's play this clip, Christopher, of Black Trees Matter once again. Here it is.
Climate adaptation strategies.
Can you measure trees? Part of that data that you're referring to, and it's in EJ, it's environmental justice, but you can also track by race. There are averages in terms of the number of trees in the neighborhood where people live.
By race, the number of trees where people live, right? So there's no personal responsibility of people to plant trees where they live. The responsibility is always someone else's. It's always got to be transferred to government. You can't plant a tree. You can't have National Arbor Day and do what happened when I was growing up and send a tree to hand a tree to every single person. Fine, it's just a sapling, but plant it. there's a teaching moment there for children. It teaches them when you plant the tree that by the time you're 40 years old, you're in 5th grade, by the time you're 40 years old, it's going to be a thriving and beautiful shade-providing tree. But we don't do that anymore. Oh, of course not. Because that would mean that we could actually be what? Self-sufficient. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Brooke Learman, who's this absurd politician in the city of Baltimore, a white Democrat in the city of Baltimore. And she voted to cancel the police in Baltimore, but her idea of fixing the cancel the police mess that has caused Baltimore to fall more and more into crime and chaos and murder, her idea was we need tree equity. So it's just like Kamala Harris. The Democrats are coordinating, podcast listeners. They're all talking to each other. You see, because black trees matter. Trees, according to Brooke Learman, tree equity is really going to stop crime in Baltimore. Don't believe that she said this? Listen to this. She said it on the House floor of the Maryland House of Delegates. We have that clip, and here it is.
Gentlelady from Baltimore City to explain your vote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and if my colleagues will indulge me for 2 quick minutes, I just want to celebrate something in this bill that hasn't been mentioned thoroughly, and that's going to have huge and immediate positive impacts on all of our constituents. And that is that we are going to plant 5 million trees in this state under this legislation. That is going to have immediate public health benefits and reduce public health costs for our citizens, for our residents. It's going to have a remarkable impact on our homes and the value of our homes, and even on crime. There are numerous studies done in Maryland showing the direct correlation between decreased crime and increased trees. So I'm thrilled to go home and tell my children that we're going to plant 5 million trees over the next 10 years in Maryland, and I salute the sponsor of this bill. Thank you.
Yes. So that was Brooke Learman on the floor of the Maryland House of Delegates saying that trees will save you from bullets. And I think what she means there is you can jump in front of a tree when there's a bullet coming in your direction with the proviso that you hear the bullet coming and the tree will save you. So there's these studies. Of course, she never talks about the studies of precisely who wrote the studies and where the studies are. But according to Brooke Learman, there are studies that if you have tree equity, you'll have less crime. But meanwhile, cancel the police. And of course, with Kamala Harris, it's Black Trees Matter. The reason why people that live in certain areas are living so badly is because there aren't enough trees. God knows they can't plant the trees themselves. Ridiculous. Let's go back to Arbor Day, podcast listeners. Let's go back to Arbor Day and provide a sapling to every single person in K to 12. You do that over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. Do you know how many millions of trees would be planted across the United States of America? That will solve the problem, not government. And that's the dumbest bill in America. Black Trees Matter. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.